Hello and welcome to tonight's interview. Tonight we're going to be interviewing the legendary war hero Leonard Kaiser. Welcome to our show. Can you give me a description of your childhood? Yes, of course. I was born in Maidenvale, London on the 3rd of November 1885. I was the third out of 5 children in a Jewish family. I went to a school called Townley Castle in Ramsgate. My father, Benjamin Kaiser, was a clockworker and importer. I didn't have a very interesting childhood. It was quite basic, really. But in 1904, at the age of 18, I moved to Canada after completing my studies. I stayed in Canada for 10 years before immigrating to Sydney, Australia, in 1914 to live with my brother Stanley and sister Marge. While living in Australia, I found work as a clerk. I didn't like my job, but I had to make money somehow. What inspired you to join the war? I wasn't necessarily inspired to join the army. I mainly did it because my mates were joining up, and after working as a clerk in Sydney for 3 months, I was ready to change my life. You say that going to war was a good life change. Did you perceive the war as a positive experience, and what would have influenced you to think that? There were several posters around Australia trying to convince men to join the war, some advertising the places you could visit, and others saying that Britain needs us. So to answer your question, I did feel that there would be a level of enjoyment in war, as opposed to the way I was living in Sydney. But of course it wasn't enjoyable at all, very far from it. But apart from this idea of enjoyment, most of all I felt that Britain really did need me, and that not fighting would be a betrayal of the country that I lived on. After enlisting in the war, what were your experiences like in training? It is hard to generalise the experience of training, but for me it was mostly okay. I stayed in line and they didn't say anything, so yeah, I didn't have a very hard time training. Although I didn't have a very hard time, there was no single experience of training back then. Different people had different experiences depending on who they were. After your training, you were obviously sent off to war. How were the first couple of months? Well, after finishing all of my training, I was sent out. I think it was early August, sometime late in the afternoon. I was sent out in the 1st Australian Infantry Brigade. We're on a divisionary attack at Lone Pine, and by nightfall we had taken over the Turkish trenches. But after the capture of the trenches, there was bitter fighting with bayonets and bombs that continued for 3 days and nights as the Turks retaliated. You know, before the war I was quite the cricket player, and I had a very good arm, so while defending these trenches I would often throw grenades, and not to blow my own whistle, but I was quite accurate, having caught a few. Well, to answer your question, although I did do quite a good job throwing those grenades, I did lose a lot of my friends, and I saw a lot of things I wish had never happened. So no, I did not enjoy my first few months in war. But let's be honest, kid, war is damn hard to enjoy. I'm so sorry. No, don't be. It's fine. During your time in the war, can you tell me about some of the battles you were involved in? Well, after the Battle of Lone Pine had ended, I was evacuated from Gallipoli because I was suffering from enteric fever. Despite this, I rejoined back into the 1st Battalion in early 1916. They were now in France. Not long after joining back, I took part in the Battle of Pozières, and then later the year, I think it was November, I was transferred to the 42nd Battalion and promoted to the rank of Sergeant, which I was pretty proud of at the time. And even later in the year, January, I was commissioned and promoted to the rank of 2nd Lieutenant, and then just 6 months later, I was promoted to Lieutenant. These events, of course, made me very happy, and I felt I was finally being recognised for my bravery. The following year in March, I was wounded and had to be evacuated from the line before I returned to take part in the fighting of Villers-Bèdènere. But my stay didn't last very long. We were gassed out a month later after arrival. After all the fighting, the manpower levels of AIF were reaching critical level, so I returned to Australia to head up recruiting campaign. But I was discharged from the army on medical grounds on the 12th of December 1918. And that is where my war life ended, and for the better, I suppose. This whole war thing really took the stuff out of me. Obviously, you were remarkably skilled and brave in the way you acted in war. What medals and achievements were you given for your service? Well, first I had the title of Lieutenant. Then there was the Victorian Cross, 1914 and 1915 Star, the British War Medal, and the Victory Medal. Apparently playing cricket as a kid helped me out more than I could ever imagine. Can you give me an idea of what you've done outside of war? Well, after returning from the war, it really just went back to normal. Living in Sydney and working as a clerk, but that became boring too fast. So I moved to England in 1919 and worked in the family business of importing clocks. I was also married to a beautiful girl called Gladys Benjamin. In 1927, I reenacted my exploits at Gallipoli in a film called For Valour. During this time, I was injured. I remained on the Australian Military Forces list of inactive reserve officers for quite a long time, however. In 1934, when the Second War began, I attempted to rejoin the military but was rejected on medical grounds. This was very disappointing to me because I really wanted to serve and protect instead of work in the clock business. Did you enjoy your life out of war more than being in war? This is a very hard question to answer. The best way I can compare it to is being hot and cold. When you are hot, you want nothing more to be colder. And when you're in war, you dread the next day and what you'll have to see, so all I want to do is leave and go home. Yet when you are cold, you want nothing more to be warmer. And when you are home, you think of all the friends that are fighting while you're at home resting, and you think of how many lives you could have saved if you were out there. So you want nothing more to go to fight. So either way, you're not where you want to be. For one final question, now that you are past your war days, what is your opinion on war? Well, you have to understand that the war is a terrible thing, but when it does happen, and it always will, if there is nobody fighting, then the enemy will kill us with our heads up out, not prepared. So it is easy to say that nobody should fight and there should be 100% peace, which I agree with, but there will always be an enemy and we will always have to defend.